the first of 3 afternoon panels. So let me start by saying I put a tie on for you, but I did not shave. The moral to the shaving story is this: if you're old enough to get your shingles shot and have not, go get it. If you're not old enough, mark your calendar to get it when you can. If you've already got it, go get another one because it's only good for 50%. And 50% is better than me at 0%. Hey, it's great to be here. Great to see so many friendly and familiar faces. I'm excited about the opportunity to be part of this first CERT symposium. Let me just start by saying thanks. Special thanks to AFCEA, the Cyber COE, and really Augusta, the city of Augusta, for making this symposium possible. It's, for me, I'm old enough now that I can recreate history, but it's amazing to see how far we've come. Let me put those of you that heard General Morrison's comments, answered questions during lunch, put an exclamation point on his comment about people not recognizing the power of the synergy that was going to come about with moving Army Cyber here. I felt that. For 2.5 years, I ran around the Army saying, Army Cyber needs to be at Fort Gordon. You would not believe how many people told me, no, it doesn't. Many cities put in requests for Army Cyber to be there, which showed that they really didn't appreciate the power of the synergy of the operational institution being together, but also for NSA and the SIGINT capabilities that were here. General Odierny said to me, he said, as soon as you get General Alexander to agree with you, we'll allow Army Cyber to be there. 2.5 years later, at Army Cyber Ball, with AFCEA and the St. Isidore Award, with General Alexander as the guest speaker, he looked at me and said, I think Army Cyber needs to be at Fort Gordon. That same night, I sent a note to General Odierno saying, I have concurrence. But I believe it's unbelievable synergy. And what you're seeing here in these 2 days is really just the tip of the iceberg of what's possible. The synergy between the operational and institutional force. Many people argued that it's not necessary because we're all virtually connected. But we had not established a branch. We had not had, really, DOTMO PF was fertile ground. We had not thought our way through what was it going to take to bring cyber forces to bear and keep them not just operationally ready, but prepared from a education, research, and training standpoint. So I just applaud you for what you're doing. I think you're just getting started on the work ahead. I believe you'll get some synergy out of what I heard in these last 3 workshops. In this particular space, education, training, and experience are converging. And by having this co-location and by thinking our way through what does it take to do each of those, we'll get that convergence even tighter, because at the end we're establishing a contract between the operational institutional force so that on any given day you can bring the effects that the commander's asking for. And if you have a problem tonight, you can wake up with the answer tomorrow. And in this space, if you don't, lives could hang in the balance. So let me also say thanks to industry, government, and academia for all you do for national security, most importantly for being part of this session, and for helping this constellation grow. It's great to see the partnerships that are growing. It's great to also appreciate that there's still lots of opportunity for growth. We have a great panel lined up for you today, with an opportunity for us to think about some of the challenges and potential priorities that continue to lie ahead for us, and an opportunity to get 4 different views with respect to some things that we might consider. As you already know, cybersecurity is one of our nation's top challenges to national and economic security. I don't imagine that it's going to go away. I only predict that it's going to get worse before it gets better. As threats continue to evolve, we have rapidly changing technology as well as our policies continue to struggle to keep up. We have to continue, we will continue to see the advantage to the attacker. So forums like this allow us to think our way through how do we continue to up our game. However, as you all know, that the challenge is really not technology, it's people. And the gap in cybersecurity personnel continues to grow. I really stopped tracking the numbers, so I'll give you the latest study that I read that says the gap is on pace to hit 1.8 million by 2022, which is a 20% increase since 2015. So something tells you that the speed of change and the gap that's growing between the skills that are required, we're not closing yet. In fact, it's only continuing to grow. Our education, our industry, academia, and government are all struggling to keep up. And our education and training programs must find ways to produce people capable of not only outthinking and outmaneuvering the threats that we face, but out-innovating and out-educating them, which is why we're here for this symposium. Today, the panel is going to explore a wide range of topics to help us identify some areas and priorities to think about as we go forward. What I'm going to do is pose some questions. So there's a ask me search at gmail.com. Start sending your questions. Here's a hint. I'm going to give you 5 of them you can load. So here's some questions that you may think about asking. Hey, ask this group, what challenges do we have in recruiting, developing, and retaining, and what have you seen that might work, or what do you know from your lane that does not work? How do we increase our ability to meet these challenges today, and probably more significantly while preparing for the future? All of us recognize today's challenges need to be addressed, but if we're not careful, we will miss what may be coming. And how do we prioritize for both of those in what we know will be continued world of limited resources, and investing in both is really a necessity. Can we ever expect to catch up, much less keep up? And what other ways should we consider in getting at this gap? And I think we have people on the panel today that might help address that. I like the talk so far, but I'd also like us to think about how can we better leverage industry, academia, government partnerships, but as we come back next year, how do we increase the international partnerships? Because I think exponentially they all get a little harder, and the international one is one that we really need to get at because they're moving pretty quickly. Also, they're learning lessons, and I think we can incorporate those, and there's no better place to do that than here at the CyberCOE. How should we think about what education is needed for everyone? What do we think is needed for some? And what do we think is needed for a few? And as I listen to what we're doing here, we tend to be talking about the few, and I'd ask us to think about what's the next group that needs to be included, and how do we get to all inside the Army? And another way of saying that is, how do we balance the need for breadth and depth with the multidiscipline approach? Because there's no discipline that's not impacted by cyber in some way. And then how does the institution prepare not only cyber personnel, but as we heard General Morrison talk about, electronic warfare, the spectrum, signal, and I believe to come, information operations. If you believe that cyber is a verb and it's the use of code to influence others or the machines they use, then there's no better place to integrate that than right here with the CyberCOE. So I would argue to you that today's panelists are going to answer all these questions and more. So start sending them in. They have not seen them, but they're prepared. They will highlight what they're doing, what's required in education and training, and how they're using technology to not only keep up with the threats, but grow the cyber workforce that's required. So I'm excited to be here. I'm really excited to introduce our panelists. First, right next to me, a good friend for many years, Bob Quinn, the Vice President for Business Development from St. Louis University, where he's focused on building sustainable relationships with government agencies, and he brings 10 years of experience with him from the Voganel School of Engineering at George Mason University, where he was deeply involved in the intelligence program there. And he's been a great friend and mentor, Bob. It's great to have you here with us today. Next to him, Dr. David Snow, Military of Affairs for the Board of Regents of the University System of Georgia. He too brings operational experience, as you can see from a distance with his tie. He told me he is not a chief petty officer, but he is a former Navy officer. So I put him in the middle to separate him from the West Point officers as bookends on both ends. But Dr. Snow, too, brings great operational and educational experience to this position, and he's going to provide a view of the significant and unbelievable growing number of resources that the state of Georgia is bringing to the cyber fight. It's great to have you with us. Next to him, a good friend, Mike Moniz, CEO and co-founder and world-renowned mountain climber, who's training me to climb mountains, and I call that elevated tee boxes. Co-founder of Circadence, a gamified and AI-based cyber training company. You heard a little bit about that at the outbrief, talking about what they're doing with respect to individual training and can get to with team training and the gunnery approach that Colonel Stanton's doing. But he's a visionary entrepreneur and recognizes the gaps we have today, appreciates what's needed for the future, and has some thoughts on how we might think about reducing that gap. On the end, Jim Yacone. Jim, it's great to have you here today. We were supposed to have, I even forgot his name already, Eric Patterson with us.
Eric Patterson.
I apologize that we confused the name. You really are like third in line, but it's great to have you here. Jim is recognized by the fact that we'll be darned if we're going to have an empty seat. Jim is seriously Director of Federal Ops for SANS, decades of leadership and operational experience. He brings military experience from combat operations with 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. He brings FBI experience where he was with counterterrorism, counterintelligence, cybersecurity, and other responsibilities in the FBI, and he brings business experience where he's led security operations for the world's largest hedge fund, Bridgewater Associates. So, Jim, it's great to have you join the panel, and we look forward to your discussion also. So with that, I'm ready to get started, Bob, and I'd like to pass it over to you, please.
Thank you. And good afternoon. So, a brief thumbnail introduction. St. Leo University is a liberal arts school, so a little separated from a lot of what you've been listening to the last day and a half. At 50,000 feet, we tend to look at the enterprise from the corpus view, so the entire organization vertical from the hands on the keyboards to the strategic leadership level, and horizontally through every one of the function responsibilities. And from our point of view in cyber and cybersecurity, every one of those boxes has to get a check mark. Right? So I want to make 4 important points around that kind of a vision. One is shortages, and the issue for us is that academia, as a matter of routine, looks to industry, and given this topic, looks to the military to help shape both the applied research, what the topics are we ought to be teaching, how we ought to be teaching them based primarily on where the students or the warriors are based, and what the approach to the teaching ought to be to make that as effective and, frankly, as short as possible so they can get out of the classroom and into the force itself. When we look at industry, one of the key issues for us is that industry today brings academia, obviously instructors, so a huge source at St. Leo of adjunct faculty. Secondly, it's funding for programs and funding for research. The concern is we get a lot of noise in terms of direction. So in solving the shortage question, one of the key challenges is, what do you want? I spent a great deal of my career as a corporate management consultant. The answer every consultant brings to the table is, we can do that. And the question, of course, is time and money to deliver it, but they never say no. And so from the academic point of view, the hard question is, what would you like us to frame? What are the particulars so we bring you the effective product that you actually want to educate your employees and your soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen? The concern right now, I'd argue, is that whether you're on the tactical battlefield or, frankly, the battlefield of Wall Street, continuous innovation is happening there. Just like TRADOC, we want to capture those real-life environments and frame those problems and solutions into something that we can both replicate and grow on for students' future pieces. We need a TRADOC level organization to help guide us as well. And frankly, after spending all day yesterday in various segments of this meeting, AFCEA has placed itself in an interesting place to frame the discussion from all of its elements. It's one of the takeaways from a quick day. I didn't expect to see that here. But clearly, this is a valuable net add for us in terms of helping to understand what the need really is. The second important point is urgency. We're not preparing for a hypothetical. Far more public attention today is faced on the banal. We're obviously tuned to what the latest tweets are. There may be news on a budget this morning. I was busy downstairs, but I haven't checked my Twitter account. We get news in funny ways today, but somehow it doesn't focus on the big things. We know a lot more about the awards in Hollywood than are really important. I'm wondering how many of us are really focused on the wicked problems that come up, particularly in terms of global security. We've got to bear in mind that there's a Sony Pictures issue. We have to bear in mind that Target wasn't an accident. I'd argue that the USS John McCain and the USS Fitzgerald can't be forgotten as simple headline kinds of events. That we're in an active battle zone today, as Bob Latif's The New War suggests. The only difference is there's not a lot of dust and smoke in this battlefield, but we're absolutely in contact. The question is, we have a declining rate of academic preparation across the country. We have graduation rates that are falling. We have, when we look at the preparation of high school students across the base, not the elite high schools, but across the base, it's difficult to find people with the maturity and difficult to find the people with the academic preparations to actually finish a bachelor program in 4 years of study. It seems more and more when you look at those hard numbers, it's scary, but the 5-year and the 6-year for a non-engineering, non-scientific degree program is not the outlier any longer. There's a very high percentage of people who do that. And I understand there are a lot of factors. People will answer economics as one of the key drivers, but by and large, it's not a lot of the cause is at the base of students aren't prepared for the intensity of the hard study and the questioning required of a solid college preparation. So the urgency for us is answered in a priority of need. What are the kind of steps we're going to put together to, as we said yesterday in some of the talks, identify those who can be successful, prepare them for the rigor that's important to be able to study, get out within a reasonable period of time. I like the number 4, right? And then pursue the graduate level studies or areas of specialization where you can actually make a contribution to advancing how we're thinking and how we're building the tools that we need. The next step that I'd like to address is unclear demand. I talked a little bit about this, but when you ask a typical person in uniform today what they really need in terms of cyber, they're going to tell you keyboard skills. I don't hear a lot about the rest of the thinking in the problem set that's there. From a liberal arts point of view, St. Leo would argue that we absolutely need the keyboard skills, and we heard the numbers yesterday in terms of what the gap is and how we're working hard to close the gap. I'd argue that everybody in the vertical and everybody in the horizontal also has to have an appropriate level of understanding about how cyber impacts their world. One of the things we talked about as an institution last year was the need for cyber and cybersecurity in the typical hospital. And half the audience looked and said, why is that? The files are secure, they're protected by federal regulation. And I said, well, that's good, but suppose you're in the OR, and it's not that the lights are going to flicker, it's the computer screen is going to flicker, and that's what's showing you where the needle is going, right? Suppose that and the records disappear for a moment, or more importantly, the data changes. You're looking at what you thought you were seeing, but it changes. I really wonder about the helmsman on the McCain. I wonder if, in fact, somewhere in the investigation we're going to uncover that it appeared the systems were working, but the helmsman turned to port and the rudder went to starboard. Somewhere, I think the real issue is that we're going to find the unexpected, and it's going to hurt. So preparing everyone in the horizontal and the vertical makes a lot of sense, because the level of attack and the quality of the attack is going to come from the unexpected. The other thing I think that's important is, as we've mentioned a couple of times in this venue already, is that it's understanding of the kinds of people who are going to be solving the problems. Now, the vested interest here is we like mathematics and we like science. We also like English literature. We like psychology. We like philosophy, ethics, and law. The easy thing is to say that every once in a while, or when you're training someone to be successful as a cyber warrior, you really want the CS kid, right? And you want the hardware expert. But what you find when you're worried about the attack, it's going to come from a place likely you're not expecting it to come. And it may just be the person who's been writing music his entire adult life, short as that may be, right? It's the unexpected preparation element that we want to help educate. So at St. Leo, we teach cyber to everyone. At St. Leo, we tie it into business programs. At St. Leo, you can major in psychology and find a minor or find a certificate in cyber, so that as you grow into your career field, you're going to have the fundamental tools to be able to participate in solving the problems that come up. The last one is law and ethics. You know, we don't want to have another waterboarding situation in the cyber battlefield. And so I'd argue that preparing people today to understand where we as Americans know our boundaries are and being able to articulate what that is. We had a conversation in one of the workshops this morning about the difficulty in finding lawyers who are skilled and experienced enough to talk about the impact of cyber law, not from the development of law, but for the experience of understanding where our current boundaries are and how those might be more distinctly defined in a real-time cyber environment. So we have to do a lot more work in what everybody used to call the soft skills. We have to be much more exacting and expecting if we're going to frame the education that we need to have the entire vertical and horizontal prepared for the 21st century. I invite your questions.
Okay, great, thank you. David, please.
All right. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Just looking at what we're doing in Georgia and why we're so focused on cyber. Obviously, with the DoD presence, we have that part of the demand signal. But also, I just want to hit out a couple points that on the fintech, financial technology and security, and the health informatics. Those are all huge areas in the Georgia economy. In Columbus with AFLAC, CDC in Atlanta. I mean, how many folks here knew that Atlanta, Georgia is #2 in the nation behind DC for federal jobs? There is a lot of work being done in Atlanta, whether it's CDC, Department of Education, whatever the case may be. So we have a huge demand signal, not only from the DoD side to protect information and data, but on the commerce side. How many folks have a debit card, credit card, right? Point of sale transaction. I wonder where those things get processed. Oh yeah, about 70% are done in Atlanta for the nation. So there's a huge data requirement, whether it's Home Depot, McKesson, UPS, financial technologies, or protecting the cyber infrastructure of our nation's armed services. So what we started doing a few years ago, we had a cyber task force working with the bases and usually the folks here at Gordon, started trying to really meet that demand signal by making sure we had the programs in place to do that. Whereas we had a couple of schools just a few years ago that were DHS, NSA certified as centers of academic excellence. Today we have 8. And within the university system, we have 26 schools, okay, all the way from the 4 research universities, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Augusta, and Georgia State, to smaller state colleges, comprehensive universities, state universities. So within those 26 institutions that are public, colleges and universities, we have 8 of them now are certified in various, whether it's in research or cyber defense education, or depending how they're classified by their certification. So we have a big need for that. Of course, not only is there that big cyber demand here in Augusta and in Atlanta. Think of Atlanta, 10 million people in the state of Georgia, 7 million live within 80 miles of Atlanta. And I think we're all on the road every morning at the same time, if you've ever tried to drive there. So you have this huge data requirement all the way from Columbus on our western border, dealing with AFLAC and financial and health informatics and personal data, to Fort Gordon here on the eastern side, to Atlanta right in the middle, and trying to meet those requirements. So we've already talked about the fintech requirements, the bioinformatics, whether that's at CDC or the program at UGA that they're focused on with their program. We have a lot of strengths that what our task force puts together, and they meet with the Georgia Technology Authority that's looking at the requirements for hopefully everybody's seen the big $65 million cyber innovation center that's being built next door, funded by the state legislature. And what we're trying to put in there, we have Augusta locally, but we also have 7 other schools that have those DHS, NSA certified programs that also might be brought in as a system to meet specific requirements and specific needs. So what we're trying to do is capture those, and all of those schools, we look at it within that nice framework, those skill sets to identify what they can bring to the fight in this arena. So we're trying to do that, and ironically, Georgia just keeps growing, right? 5 years in a row, Georgia, #1 state in which to do business. Companies are always moving here. Oh yeah, it's also in the running for the whole Amazon relocate, right? Oh, #2 for film production, film and digital. 300 movies and TV shows were made in Georgia last year. California has a few more, but we're right there. And all those blockbusters, the majority, 3 of the top 10 were made in Georgia. The next 2 were made in UK. So you're watching Avengers, you're watching Captain America, you're watching stuff being made out of, the local studios at one of our 100 sound stages. That's all digital. That's all data. It might be personal information and informatics. It might be medical. It might be financial. It might be some film company that doesn't want their stuff to be compromised or pirated. So there's a big requirement in addition to the DoD requirement, which drives all things over here with the GTA center that they're building. So we're working hard to do that. We've added just last Wednesday, the Board of Regents, our last meeting, we added a online master's in cybersecurity at Columbus State, which is one of our 8 schools that are DHS, NSA certified, and ironically, they're all kind of near the bases. You think UGA, Georgia Tech, Kennesaw, Columbus State, Augusta, Georgia Southern, Middle Georgia State with forensics, them in Georgia Southern with cyber forensics. So they all have these little niche programs, and we're trying to leverage that to meet the needs of the state and the nation and the region, as the case may go. That's probably enough for now, because we're supposed to have 5 to 7 minutes. I probably went over, so I'll pass it on and answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Right.
Hi, I'm Mike Moniz. I'm with Circadence, and we are actually opening an office up here. So, yes, it is a good place to do business, and we've had a wonderful experience here working with, in particular, with the team at the Cyber Protection Brigade, working hand in hand with them in addressing, really wading into the waters, unknown waters to some degree, on how do we actually train a fighting force that is in a complex and adaptive environment. It's constantly changing. Tactics are evolving daily. How do you assess that? How do you look into that and peer into the readiness of your fighting force? And we've learned a tremendous amount by working hand in hand with the team down here, and I think that we're developing a capability that will ultimately be very potent in something that can be a reference architecture that we can begin to share across the services. Our company, its heritage is in massively multiplayer gaming, so that's the first audacious, crazy thing I did before I started climbing 8,000-meter peaks that Rhett alluded to. Our experience in online gaming was interesting, and it was a time at which we were trying to make near real-time support of online gaming environments viable across 1990s infrastructure. And we developed a lot of techniques and ability to scale, and ultimately we delivered product from Microsoft and Sony and pretty much every major online game company in the world. We built the underlying technology, and we saw an opportunity. We sold that company, and we started working with the RSDP platform for the cyber range environment, and we saw that it's a tremendously powerful platform, but it was really like giving your kids an Xbox with no games. It's like, wow, this menu is really cool, but it gets a little tiring, and me developing my own product from scratch is not going to necessarily leverage the potential of this platform, nor is it an efficient use of my time. So we looked at that challenge, and we saw that there's an existing 2 to 3 million gap in trained cybersecurity professionals. And we have an existing base of well-trained, thanks to companies like SANS and others, cybersecurity professionals. And how do you keep them refreshed in an environment where it's a complex and adaptive system? It's constantly changing. So we saw an opportunity to leverage our background in cyber range technology and virtualization to create scale there. And really the company thematically is based on scale. How do we create a persistent training environment that we can train not tens, not hundreds, but thousands, tens of thousands of people simultaneously and get much higher yields from that? How do we scale really the three areas that we saw that we're not going to scale in terms of cost and people? We're training, persistent training. So as we know, I think most should know that cyber is a difficult concept to teach. You really need to learn cybersecurity. In particular, when things are changing all the time, a changing environment requires good judgment. And not to beat the mountaineering themes, but we survive based on our experiences. And the more experience that you have to draw upon, the greater the chance that you'll be able to inform good judgment. So having an environment that is complex and adaptive really requires technology. And we've been focused on leveraging artificial intelligence to bridge that gap. So best of breed natural language processing to build the largest corpus in the world of cyber information to draw upon. So while we're not going to replace the instructor, we certainly can augment the learning experience and make that available anytime, anywhere, from a classified environment to CAT card-enabled couch access if necessary. We want to speak to our audience, which is really our customer, is a young person who grew up in a gamified world. We want to keep it authentic to the fight, but also engaging and interesting so we keep their attention and we leverage those tools effectively. So as we're going forward, AI will be, I believe, a big part of the closing the gap. I'm not, and this may be a bold statement, but I'm not entirely convinced that we'll ever truly train our way out of this cybersecurity problem. I think that the sophistication of the fight and the application of the technology and the fact that this remains an incredibly attractive target for asymmetric adversaries around the globe, they'll continue to invest tremendously in technologies to exploit the attack surface, whether it's the human, the IT, or the OT attack surface. So how do we train the gap, and how do we keep the trained and ready for that fight? And I think that that's going to require us to capture the collective intellect of a large group of people across the entire. So the potential here and I look at it from a yield of dollars spent on training. So if you're going to spend $1 training, what's your yield? How do you increase your yield? You increase it through leveraging technology and gamification and persistence. Maybe you get to a 70-cent yield on the dollar. But how do we look at it differently, truly like an investor, and say, look, how do we get a 3 to 5x return on our training dollar? And I think that that's from really looking to the future. I think the dawn of machine learning, big data, the ability to extract that. We are now capturing an enormous amount of data that we've never seen before, which is really the tradecraft and TTPs of our best and brightest. There is, we all know, a migratory group, and they tend to move, and they should. I mean, they put a lot of time into a very specialized career path. Nonetheless, it doesn't mean we can't capture a little of that collective intellect and then harness that and leverage machine learning to essentially prepare ourselves for the fight in 3 to 5 years. So that's my my remarks.
Okay, great, Mike, thanks.
Thank you.
Jim?
So I just want to thank FCA, and sir, I want to thank you for sticking through a conference, a great conference that you put together, but it means a lot to have the senior leadership stay here, and it's a forcing function for private and public sectors to stay and collaborate. Everybody knows how I was selected for the board. It was kind of a hey you by General Hernandez, and I'm actually proud to be here. So Eric Patterson's flight was canceled due to the inclement weather, and so you got second best. My thoughts on the topic. It was interesting. I got tasked with the assignment last night, so I went back to my room and I just started thinking and laying in bed. And the first thing I thought about was how many schools, how many skill-based schools have I been to in 33 years in the federal government, some time in the private sector? And the answer was 14. And I think all of us have been there. And we know what right looks like. We know a great instructor when we see one. We know great curriculum as it's presented, and we can recognize it, but it's trying to quantify that. So I sat and I figured I'd be your rogue member, sir, and pay you back and require your leadership to pull me back in on this board. But I thought through just essentially 3 hypotheses, right? The first one is, and I think it was proven out in a lot of the working groups here today, the more technical the subject, the higher the turnover required for both instructors and course content. And a number of different groups here came to that same conclusion. The more technical the subject, the more practical skills-based delivery of instruction, right? So less theory, more hands-on. And then the third one was it's both senior leaders and our instructors require both soft and hard skills to teach, mentor, manage, and lead cyber operations. So that I'm going to go back on point here, sir, so you don't have me being too rogue. But the first thing that they asked us to address, or asked SANS to kind of point out here as a member of the board, was accepted standards of what comprises an effective instructor. And it was Colonel Sangster and Colonel Waters. I was in their working group this morning, and our discussion started with how do we implement a training strategy to build and expand a cyber workforce. We started to boil the ocean. And it was interesting because the conversation amongst senior leaders, senior enlisted, senior warrant officers and others all came back around to the instructors and the caliber of the instructors. So as we started trying to eat the elephant of a huge, cyber training strategy, we realized at least the first step's got to be how do we attract and retain talented instructors. And I would tell you, for as long as I've been in the military and FBI and a bunch of other agencies that I've trained with, there's always that stigma of going back to the schoolhouse and being an instructor and being pulled out of the operational line. As an operational guy who spent most of my career in operational assignments, I was there myself, right, with the stigma attached. So the challenge for the organization is, how do we elevate the cadre of instructors? How do we elevate the positions themselves in the eyes of the organization? Well, you have to have a highly selective process, and you have to continue to emphasize to the operational or the operators out there the importance of coming back. Because the skilled operators are not going to come back to the schoolhouse if there's a stigma attached to it. So it's trying to change the way the organization thinks about those assignments. So we kind of went through that, and I'm going to use a little bit of an analogy here. At various levels within the FBI, I had different responsibilities, but at a certain point, I was in charge of quite a bit of training for all the special operations folks within the FBI, to include the bomb technicians. And that bomb technician schoolhouse is jointly run by the U.S. Army since 1972 with the FBI at Redstone. And I took over, and it was in the midst of all the work that was being done overseas in Afghanistan and Iraq, and all the IEDs and intelligence that the U.S. government was gaining from being downrange. And I was trying to push those TTPs through the schoolhouse at TRADOC and get changes to the curriculum rapidly, so that we could teach and train a cadre of we had a throughput of about 1,200 students, local, state, federal bomb technicians across the country. And it at the time, it was taking well over a year to get simple course curriculum changes. And the cadre of instructors there, a lot of them were very, very experienced, but they had been there for quite a long time. So within the eyes of the students, they were like, okay, when's the last device that this individual's been downrange on? So I worked with General Mangum, who I worked very closely with in the 160th years earlier, and he was the deputy commander, and I went there and I just said, how do we fix this problem? How do we increase the speed of learning that we are taking from the battlefield, that principally the DOD is, and ingest it into the local, state, and federal law enforcement bomb tech curriculum? And we came up with some innovative solutions, but it was really that balanced workforce. And it was bringing more of the operational entities and trying to elevate the status of those instructors and make them relevant in the eyes of the organization and get people to volunteer and come back. So that's kind of a key pillar of what we have to do to establish an effective and more effective instructor cadre. The other thing that I will tell you, SANS just has an incredible process for being in many organizations, is the quality control of our instructors. So to become an instructor in the organization, you've got to be best in brand to begin with, and you have to be a known SME in your area of expertise. And then they go through about a 2 or 3 year vetting process before they're fully anointed to be an instructor. And then once they're instructors, they are getting graded every single time in front of every single student, and that feedback is going not just to the curriculum leads, but literally all the way, up to the CEO of SANS, and they're looking at it. And it's a 360, right? So it's the students are giving feedback, the curriculum leads are looking at the instructors, and then even the executive team is kind of looking down and saying, hey, are we doing the right thing? Not just with the instructors, but also with the content of the curriculum. Are we updating it 2 and 3 times a year to remain technically viable? Just a couple thoughts to think about. The second thing to kind of get back on point was creating senior leaders and instructors that are technically and tactically competent. So the military's been doing that for years, and I'm actually, for me, it's pretty inspiring to see the development, and I saw it through the Net Wars tournament here, where we now have majors and lieutenant colonels and chief warrant officer 5s and 4s that are true cyber operators that grew up in the ranks. And it's bubbling up in the organization, and it's leading to better collective unit level training. And so that is extremely important. So as the branch matures and leadership matures, it becomes more and more important to do it. How we learn, Alan covered that yesterday in that graph, right, on abilities and skills. The learning environment is different. Not just how we learn through distance learning and other things, but actually gamifying how we learn. And so we're seeing that on a wide scale over in the UK through CyberStart, which Alan talked about yesterday, and the kids are taking to a new way of learning. We've got to look forward and say, do we have to evolve, and do some of our curriculums have to evolve to encompass that type of learning? I will tell you, the upper right, those talents generally self-identify, whether they're leaders or crack shot instructors or cyber operators, they generally self-identify. The key challenge here is the upper left quadrant. Those with abilities but little skill that we can suss out from the population and pull them in to be future leaders in the organization. I will tell you, the online learning and the flexibility it requires for the complex environment is absolutely instrumental. So today's leader, I mean, it's unbelievable the technical capability or the technical competence that senior leaders have to have nowadays, because the world is just becoming more complex. So I think that demands a distance learning option. And I'll tell you, as I was rising through the ranks in the FBI, at about the assistant special agent in charge level, I started having oversight, management, leadership for cybersecurity intrusion investigations. And boy, I had investigators and analysts coming and briefing me on cases, and I mean, they were speaking a different language. And so I knew I needed to go retool. And SANS has a large contract with the FBI, and I started taking SANS training, and I did it through on demand. Never really attended one of the conferences in person. But at a certain point, I went back for a second course, right? Now I was an agent in charge out in Colorado and Wyoming, and I had the tiger by the tail with cybersecurity intrusion investigations out in Colorado that spanned the globe. And I had to go, obviously, do some unbelievable victim notifications with some significant companies out in that in the telecom sector. And to sit down with a CISO, you have and explain how they were victimized. It takes a level of understanding and competence within this domain. And so the FBI has kind of walked through this journey, and they now have a workforce management program in place to develop the entire workforce. They're no longer looking at cyber as a type of investigation, but it's really a modality used by everybody. Criminals, spies, espionage, everything is used through it, and everybody needs to understand it. So they are expanding their delivery of training to the entire workforce and are no longer just focusing on those working cyber operations within the FBI. Subject to your question, sir.
Okay, fantastic. Do you have any questions over there, or shall I start?
Yes, we do. And good afternoon again. I'm Sly Cotton. Just a reminder, all questions will come from the consolidated database. And for those of you that stated you may not have access to submit a question via Gmail, in the back of the room there are pads and pencil. Just craft your question on the pads and get them to us in the far right side of the room. Now, sir, with that said, we have time for one question. And that question is, most job ads for government cyber require a Bachelor of Science degree. Do you think this may change in the near future, as though there are many quality associate degree programs that prepare entry-level candidates, and those programs prepare cyber personnel quicker, and they are typically skills-based and hands-on? It's for the panel at large.
That sounds pretty easy, Sly. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll go ahead real quick. A lot of times what we're trying to do from the university and college level is a lot of the credentials, what we're thinking, and it's really a nationwide effort, is where a lot of them are nested. So maybe there's a certificate program, an associate's program, they kind of build that leads to a bachelor's. Now, according to the Chronicle of Higher Education a couple of years ago, about 85%, I think, required a four-year degree. But a lot of it is really tied, like you said, to the skill set. And especially for those military members separating, already have a clearance, already have a mission focus, already have a sense of selfless service. They many times can work on an initial credential as they build to the subsequent credentials, maybe to advance within an organization, whatever. So a lot of what we have at the state college level is still on the degree program, but we also have the technical college system of Georgia. We have many of our state colleges have associate's programs and certificates as well. to including adult continuing ed, non-career ed, just for experiential learning to get that experience, to meet that credential to move on and meet the workforce needs. So it's probably a little bit of each building on it to grow to meet a specific requirement for that, as defined by the sector, whether it's commerce or DoD.
Yeah, if I may, and I'd go the other way as well. It not only helps people build up from zero or close to a specific skill set, it's also an opportunity to finish out someone who's spent a career or a decent piece of a career in a different career area, and it's a way for them to orient up to a level where they're comfortable. So it's not unusual for a mid-career person, someone with a master's degree, to go over and pick up an 18 or a 15 credit graduate certificate in cybersecurity. It not only gets their feet wet, but just like the rookie, it often draws them into a deeper dive at one other level. And because this is, as we've been saying for the last 2 days, enormously rapidly changing environment, frankly, at one point of view, you could come in and take one of those things every year and you still wouldn't be current. The moment you start, you'd be 4 months behind the curve. So I think it serves both of those needs.
Okay, Sly, you got another one?
That was our final question for the panel. Please welcome Mr. Mike Warlick
So
back
let-
to the stage.
Hold it.
Who?
A couple more questions here.
Sure.
Okay, I'm ready. So I have no easy questions. I warned you before. Usually I have military people up here, and the question is, what can industry or academia do for you? So I'm going to flip it on its head since I have no military here. How can the cyber COE, and as the military presence grows here, not just help you, but help other partners that are sitting out there today?
This is the fourth man syndrome.
So from my perspective, we've had, as I mentioned, we've had a tremendous working relationship with the Cyber Protection Brigade. We see the skill sets that they're looking for, understanding how to get that, essentially that feedback loop back into the cyber schoolhouse is of tremendous value. And being able to get those to dovetail the educational experience at the university level, to create an ecosystem that feeds into the requirements once they do take on a role at the Cyber Protection Brigade, that they have had there's a very much a clear line of experiences that flow from either the university environment in this community or from the cyber schoolhouse.
You know, I just say remaining anchored in the curriculum, you know, and the quality of the curriculum and the quality of instructors, and then keeping an open dialogue and sharing and exchanging with industry about best practices. I mean, this is a cyber center of excellence. Hundreds and hundreds of soldiers are taught here every year, and there's tremendous learning for everybody, right?
How do you keep up with the speed of change? And keep the curriculum currently, particularly here, as we know we're going to have operational insights gained every day.
That's right. So I can tell you within SANS, you know, technology is changing, right? So, and we are providing essentially commercial off-the-shelf training, and we are taking those lessons learned from industry. So it's the beauty of the company that Alan set up way back when. He didn't want permanent staff instructors. So our instructors are not part of SANS funded staffing level. They are contractors that are best in brand, best in industry, that have then worked themselves into a contract. So it's maintaining that flexible, as an instructor, the bona fides with your customers and the students that you're trying to teach and train by being real world and having real world operational experience, and then also just being a zealot about quality control of the curriculum and injecting the new ideas as changes are made. Really, it's about every 3 to 6 month endeavor for us.
Okay, good.
So going back to one of the points I made earlier, we've got 2 schoolhouses on the installation. And one of the things I suggested is that mid-career people already proficient in one place, right, probably see in today's environment an opportunity to at least become more familiar with, more agile in the skill sets required in the other. The liberal arts people who operate most of their programs of study online would love to see the students coming out of the Signal School see them look at online graduate certificates or online master's degrees in cyber, which does not give them keyboard proficiency, but it builds the awareness as they grow their own careers, and for later in the world they can tack those pieces on. But it's the cross-functional acquaintance that's very important.
General Hernandez, I'd add one thing from Sam's perspective. The military can inform us on what they view are the threats over the horizon, so that we can start working on how do we develop courses to present and address that threat.
Just to add one other thing, General, from our perspective, a big part of our platform has always been about developing tools to empower our customers to develop their own missions on the fly. So we want to make that as easy as possible. It's already complex. We want to give them the ability to sit and have their own mission planners develop their own content that allows them in real time to begin to do mission rehearsal, to address the assessment needs that they truly need, and to train the skills that they really need to train. So that's, from the very beginning, our Orion product has been a big part of that. And really a tremendous amount of time actually working with feedback from our customers on exactly what they're looking for. But that's been a requirement from day one. Every single one of our customers said, we want to build our own content. We want to have that, and we want to make it easy to build it, but high fidelity.
One other thing that we've been doing, and we've had discussions with Mr. Casimir and his staff and Mr. Bugner, we're working on, so we can be more responsive, an MOU between the university system and the cyber command. That way, they aren't having to fish around between, hey, local school X, Y, what do you have? They can say, here's a demand signal, we're looking for this, here's a problem we have, what's in your toolkit that can maybe help us address that need? And we can help kind of sort it out to the right. Maybe it's University of North Georgia and their cyber camp, maybe it's Augusta, maybe it's Georgia Tech. It could be big, small. What is the best instrument to meet that need, to meet the needs of the state and the region and the DoD?
Yeah, great. Any others? Okay, let me ask another one here then, as long as we have time. Okay, one more. Given what's been done the last couple days, so I talked to a lot of soldiers, I talked to a lot of junior leaders, and when they have a problem, they go to their posse, trusted peers, so that they can wake up in the morning with the answer. So how can we take our partnerships, industry, academia, and government, here to leverage cyber COE and the operational units that are coming to a level where soldiers can identify a problem, wake up with the answer in the morning? What type of criteria would be important for you to think about from your view that would be important in this? That'll take a couple minutes to think.
That was the softball question you said you're going to send us?
So we know what today's
Repeat the question.
We know what today's people want, right? They're confronted with a challenge, they want the solution, right? So, powerful partnership opportunity here, industry, academia, government, cyber COEs building into this, not just the curriculum, but how they respond to field needs. And how would they build that to enable everyone to be a part of it? And this is, to me, the ultimate constellation we're trying to get to. What's the criteria you think would be important?
Well, from our perspective, we've tried to build an environment that allows for in-platform communication, for sharing, for the ability to share TTPs. So we capture on the platform, we capture virtually every keystroke, every pause, every tool used, and imagine now being able to do a complex mission and then say, you have that question, and you say, okay, I can share the entire replay of this mission. Here's the replay. It's exactly how I did it. This was my approach. Imagine from a commander's perspective now that I want to teach a new set of TTPs on a new mission. I can then essentially capture the best, or even genetically graft together a series of the best and create an entirely new set of TTPs, and then share that and train against it. So that's been our approach.
David?
Yeah, I was looking at the identification of the requirement. Much like if you've ever done, joint operational planning or Army planning, because, that's how we spell joint planning, Army planning, with that 5-word prayer. If you can identify in commander's guidance, the better commander guidance results in a better SCOA, right? Better course of action. So the more guidance and direction or probing questions that are put out up front helps us maybe respond more effectively and quickly to meet the need. Is it a process change that we're looking for? Is it a hardware change? Is it a perception change that we need to look at this from a different angle to solve these wicked problems of the 21st century? So the greater the clarification, the greater the solution that can probably be presented. Like we used to tell the general, if you want it bad, you're going to get it bad. Give us the information. What is it you're looking for? And we can give you the options to pick from. Here's your strengths and weaknesses to meet that need.
Good. Clearly define the problem.
So here's a build, all right? At Shameless Commerce Division, this took a lot of planning to get us to this 3-day event. And I'd argue that one of the mechanical solutions to the question may just be to form a mini of this kind of a cert, because we've got thinkers from across the spectrum here. We've got a cross-section of the leadership here, when maybe it's a periodic thing that happens annually, or if there's suddenly a spike somewhere where it's clear we need to identify and train for something else that we haven't thought about. Just like somebody on the panel mentioned a few minutes ago, it takes a long time to get that process through TRADOC and finally get it in the classroom. It may be that a cross-functional group like this that meets within a day gathers with a specific mission, so there's a question or two on the deck, and the objective walking out the door is a straw model for what we could do. And that goes to the COE leadership to decide how they want to implement it. But it focuses the energy with a broad group of people in the room.
Okay, great. I only bring that up because I started without a phone book. No idea who to call, right? And we're getting to a partnership in a community here that's almost like CDC. And it needs to be connected in a way that is real-time, collaborative, and can solve problems as they come up or get in front of the next one. And so I'm thinking about it from that perspective. The phone book is getting bigger now, but how do we increase our collaboration is what I'd ask us to think about. So this has been great. I appreciate your participation, voluntary or not. And thank you for your support, all of you. Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. You actually did get cheated for a few minutes, but we got you recovered, and that's fantastic. We couldn't get a stronger team than this panel up here today to talk about those